Imagine waking up on a random Monday morning in June, checking your phone for the weather, and instead finding out that the best defensive player on planet Earth just got traded. No warning, no leaks for weeks, just a phone buzzing off the nightstand with the words, Myles Garrett, traded, gone. And that is just one moment, because this offseason, the NFL didn't slow down for a single second. While most fans thought the league was asleep between the draft and training camp, front offices were quietly building bombs and lighting the fuse. $500 million contracts, legends changing zip codes, locker room stare-downs, arrests that shook entire rosters. If you blinked between the draft and the 4th of July, you missed one of the wildest stretches this league has seen in years. So sit back, because we are about to walk through every single one of these stories in order, exactly how they happened. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why the entire landscape of the NFL looks different than it did just a few months ago. Let's start in Cleveland, Ohio, a city that has bled orange and brown through decades of heartbreak, quarterback carousels, and rebuilding plans that never quite finished rebuilding. But for 9 years, there was one constant, one player who made all of it bearable: Myles Garrett, the first overall pick back in 2017. A man who didn't just play defensive end, he terrorized it. Over his career in Cleveland, he racked up over 400 tackles. And get this, 125.5 sacks. He is the franchise's all-time sack leader. In 2025 alone, he broke the single-season sack record with 23 sacks in 1 year. 23. Think about that pace. That's basically a sack and a half every single game for an entire season. He made 6 straight Pro Bowls, 5 All-Pro teams in 6 years. And heading into this offseason, he had just won his second Defensive Player of the Year award. The best player at the peak of his powers on a team that desperately needed him. And yet, somehow, in the middle of an ordinary June, the Browns traded him away. Here's how it happened. Rewind to a year earlier. Garrett had actually requested a trade out of Cleveland once before. Frustrated with the direction of the franchise, the Browns responded not by moving him, but by locking him down with a 4-year extension worth $160 million. It looked like the story was over. Garrett was staying. The front office, led by General Manager Andrew Berry, said publicly and repeatedly that Garrett would be a Cleveland Brown for his entire career. Owners Dee and Jimmy Haslam echoed that same message. This was their guy, their identity, their one bright light in a franchise that had struggled to find stability at the most important position on the field, quarterback. But cracks started to show. During the offseason, while the rest of the Browns roster went through their voluntary workout program, Garrett was overseas, spending time in Korea and Japan. He stayed in touch with the front office about roster moves and the draft, but he never once met face-to-face with the team's brand new head coach, Todd Monken. Not a single interaction. If you are trying to build trust with a new coach, staying completely silent and staying an ocean away is not exactly a great start. People around the league started whispering. Something wasn't right. Then came a quiet contract detail that most casual fans would have scrolled right past. In March, the Browns modified an option bonus in Garrett's deal. Then, just 7 days before the start of the season's business, they adjusted it again. On its own, that might mean nothing. But paired with everything else, the missed meetings, the distance, the silence, it started to look like breadcrumbs. Like the front office was quietly preparing the exits, just in case. And then the Los Angeles Rams came calling. The Rams have a history of doing exactly this kind of thing. Back in 2021, with the Super Bowl scheduled to be played in their own stadium, they made a stunning trade for quarterback Matthew Stafford. Everyone thought it was a gamble. They won the Super Bowl that same year. So when Rams general manager Les Snead smells a chance to go all in, he does not hesitate. He started making calls about Garrett almost immediately after this year's draft wrapped up. His first offer was a package of draft picks. Cleveland said no. They held firm, publicly repeating that Garrett was not available. But behind closed doors, the conversation kept going. And eventually, the Browns told the Rams something that changed everything. They said if you want Garrett, draft picks alone won't cut it. You have to include Jared Verse. Now, Jared Verse is not some throwaway player. He was the Rams' first-round pick in 2024, a rising star pass rusher who had already racked up 12 sacks and 22 tackles for loss across his first 2 seasons. He made the Pro Bowl in both of his first 2 years, joining an incredibly small list of players to do that, alongside names like Drake, May, and Brock Bowers. The Rams did not want to give him up, but if they wanted a true difference maker on defense, someone who could turn them from contenders into favorites, this was the price. So they paid it. The final trade sent Myles Garrett to the Los Angeles Rams. In return, the Cleveland Browns received Jared Verse, plus a future first-round pick in 2027, a second-round pick in 2028, and a third-round pick in 2029. 3 future draft picks and a talented young pass rusher for the best defensive player of this generation. When the trade was finalized, Garrett posted an emotional message to social media thanking the city of Cleveland and the fans, saying the city had shaped him and made him tougher. He said the best days of the franchise were still ahead. It was heartfelt. It was also final. The Browns' front office released their own statement. They said they had always wanted Garrett to be, in their words, a one-helmet player for his entire career. They said that as this offseason began, they truly did not picture a future where Garrett wasn't wearing brown and orange. But as trade talks intensified, they said they reached a crossroads. Hold onto a generational talent who had become the very identity of the franchise, or make a difficult decision they believed was best for the long run. They chose the picks. They chose the future. Because here is the harsh truth about the Browns situation. This is a team that has not found stability at quarterback in years. Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders are set to compete for the starting job, and neither answer inspires total confidence around the league. Garrett is 30 years old. By the time Cleveland is truly ready to compete again, if that day even comes in the next few seasons, Garrett may be past his prime. So the front office made the calculation that his trade value would never be higher than it was right now, fresh off a record-breaking, history-making season. It's a brutal, cold, calculated business decision, but it is also completely understandable if you step back and look at the whole picture. Now, let's talk about what this means for the other side, the Rams. Before this trade even happened, analysts were already grading the Rams roster as one of the best in football, pound for pound, maybe even slightly better than the defending Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. Remember, the Rams and Seahawks battled brutally close games last season. One overtime loss by 2 points, another conference championship loss by a combined 5 points. The margins were razor thin. So when a team that close to winning it all suddenly adds the most dominant defensive player in the league, you're not just improving, you're potentially tipping the entire balance of power in the NFC. Think about what the Rams now have. Matthew Stafford, the reigning most valuable player at quarterback at 38 years old and playing some of the best football of his life. Puka Nacua, arguably the most dynamic wide receiver threat in football. And now, on defense, Myles Garrett rushing off the edge. Analysts have pointed out that the Rams will become the first team since the merger back in 1970 to field a reigning offensive most valuable player and a reigning defensive player of the year on the same roster in the same season. Let that sink in for a second. That has never happened in the modern era of football. Not once. The move instantly reshaped the Super Bowl odds. Betting markets shifted the Rams into the position of clear favorites to win it all, ahead of even the defending champion Seahawks, ahead of the Buffalo Bills, ahead of the Baltimore Ravens, all because of one trade completed months before the season even begins. But here's the thing about football and about life in general. One blockbuster move rarely happens in isolation. And as we are about to see, the Garrett trade wasn't even the only franchise-altering deal to shake the league this offseason. Let's shift over to the East Coast now, to a story that had been quietly building for months, almost like a pot of water slowly reaching a boil. This one involves a wide receiver who helped deliver a Super Bowl championship to Philadelphia, and a franchise across the country desperately searching for a true number one target. His name is A.J. Brown. For 4 seasons, Brown terrorized opposing secondaries alongside Devonta Smith in Philadelphia. Acquired in a trade back in 2022, Brown and Smith formed one of the most feared receiver duos in the entire league. Together, they helped the Eagles capture 4 playoff appearances, 3 division titles, 2 conference championships, and ultimately, a Super Bowl trophy after dominating the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 59. Brown himself became one of only 7 players in NFL history to reach 8,500 receiving yards and 60 touchdown catches within his first 7 seasons in the league. That is elite, rarefied company. But something started to shift beneath the surface during the 2025 season. Brown's production dipped to a career low 12.9 yards per catch. His frustrations with the offense started leaking out, first through cryptic social media posts, then through visible frustration during media appearances. At one point, late in the season, he stopped speaking to the media entirely. That silence coincided with a private, face-to-face meeting with team owner Jeffrey Lurie, where Brown reportedly promised he would stop airing his grievances publicly. Everyone around the league could see where this was headed. Even as Eagles general manager Howie Roseman insisted publicly, over and over, that Brown was staying in Philadelphia, his actions told a very different story. During this year's draft, the Eagles aggressively traded up in the first round to select wide receiver Mekhi Lemon out of USC. They also traded for another receiver, Dontavian Wicks, out of Green Bay. Then they signed veteran Hollywood Brown and receiver Elijah Moore as free agent additions. If you are stacking up that much depth at one single position, and you already have a superstar locked in at that spot, the obvious conclusion is that you are quietly preparing for his exit. And that exit came in June. The Patriots had been circling for months. It made perfect sense. Brown's very first head coach in the NFL, back during his rookie years in Tennessee, was a man named Mike Vrabel. Vrabel is now the head coach of the New England Patriots. The two maintained a real relationship over the years, well beyond just football. So when the Patriots needed a true number one receiver to pair with their rising young quarterback, Drake May, all signs pointed toward a reunion. Roseman held firm on his asking price for months, but eventually, right at the start of June, the two sides agreed to terms. The trade sent A.J. Brown to the New England Patriots. In exchange, the Eagles received a future first-round draft pick in 2028 and a 5th-round pick in 2027. Now here's something interesting about the timing. Both teams deliberately waited until after June 1st to complete this trade, and that wasn't a coincidence, it was strategy. If the trade happened before June 1st, the Eagles would have been hit with a massive dead salary cap charge of over $43 million, all in one single year. By waiting, they were able to split that charge across 2 seasons instead, roughly $16 million in 2026 and $27 million in 2027. It's a financial chess move that happens behind the scenes on almost every major trade like this. And it explains why so many of these blockbuster deals seem to cluster right around the same early June timeframe every single year. For the Patriots, this trade instantly transforms their passing offense. Drake May led the entire NFL last season in both completion percentage and yards per attempt, numbers that actually surpassed Jalen Hurts' numbers in Philadelphia. Now, May gets to throw to a true elite, physical, dominant number one receiver in his prime. Brown will wear a new jersey number with New England, switching from the number he wore his entire career in Philadelphia, symbolizing a genuine fresh start. Analysts projected that in 2026, Brown could see something in the range of 130 targets and over 1,200 receiving yards in New England's offense. That is a massive weapon for a team that just made a Super Bowl appearance the season before. For Philadelphia, meanwhile, this is Devonta Smith's team now, for the first time since his rookie season. With Brown gone, that first-round pick, Mekhi Lemon, suddenly has a real path to significant playing time as a rookie instead of sitting behind a superstar. It's a changing of the guard on both sides of this trade, and it happened almost in the same week as the Myles Garrett trade, making the stretch of the NFL calendar one of the most seismic in recent memory. But we are not done yet. Not even close. Because while all of this drama was unfolding in Cleveland and Philadelphia, another major storyline was developing out west, one that also involved the Los Angeles Rams, and it happened even earlier in the offseason, laying the groundwork for everything that would follow. Let's rewind back to March, right at the very start of free agency. The Kansas City Chiefs, still one of the league's most respected organizations, had a difficult decision to make regarding their star cornerback, Trent McDuffie. A former first-round pick back in 2022, McDuffie had become one of the most dominant cover corners in football, racking up 246 total tackles, 3 interceptions, 34 passes defensed, and even 5.5 sacks across his first 4 seasons. He was a 2-time Super Bowl champion, a first-team All-Pro in 2023, a second-team All-Pro in 2024. In short, exactly the kind of homegrown talent that franchises usually build around for the next decade. But McDuffie was entering the final year of his rookie contract, and everyone around the league knew his next deal was going to be enormous, likely somewhere in the range of $30 million per year. The Chiefs, meanwhile, were aging in several key spots and needed draft capital to keep their roster competitive around Patrick Mahomes. So General Manager Brett Veach made a calculated decision. Rather than pay McDuffie top of the market money and risk being stuck without draft picks to fill other holes, he traded him. The deal sent McDuffie to the Los Angeles Rams in exchange for a package of 4 total draft picks, including the 29th overall selection in this year's draft, plus a 5th-round pick, a 6th-round pick, and a future 3rd-round pick in 2027. It was a stunning move, especially for a team that had just won back-to-back Super Bowls a few years earlier and reached the championship game again the year after that. Even Patrick Mahomes himself reacted on social media, simply writing a single word that captured the mood of the entire fan base. He wrote, quote, "Damn." For the Rams, this trade signaled something important months before the Myles Garrett blockbuster even happened. It signaled that Los Angeles was fully committed to going all in around their aging but still elite quarterback, Matthew Stafford, who had just won league MVP the season before. Almost immediately after acquiring McDuffie, the Rams agreed to terms with him on a 4-year contract extension worth $124 million, an average of $31 million per year. That made him at the time the highest paid cornerback in the entire history of the league, surpassing names like Sauce Gardner and Derek Stingley Jr. So by the time June rolled around and the Myles Garrett trade hit the news, the Rams had already spent the spring rebuilding their defense from the back end forward, adding an elite cornerback locked up long-term, and pairing him with young stars already on the roster like Jared Verse, Byron Young, Kobe Turner, and Braden Fisk. And then when they landed Garrett too, all of it clicked into place, transforming a very good defense into one that could legitimately be the scariest unit in football heading into the season. It's wild when you actually lay all these pieces out next to each other like this. 3 separate mega trades. The McDuffie trade in March, the Garrett trade in June. And in between all of it, the Rams also completing side moves like signing cornerback Jalen Watson to reunite him with his old Chiefs teammate. This wasn't luck. This was a front office with a very clear plan, spending an entire offseason relentlessly upgrading again. Now, let's swing back over to Kansas City, because the Chiefs had their own separate headline-making story developing at almost exactly the same time. And this one had nothing to do with a trade. This one was about loyalty, legacy, and money on a scale that had never been seen before in the history of professional football. Patrick Mahomes. To understand just how significant this next moment is, you have to remember where Mahomes' season ended the year before. In mid-December, during a game against the Los Angeles Chargers, Mahomes suffered a season-ending torn ACL and torn LCL in his knee. He underwent surgery the very next day. The Chiefs finished that season with a losing record, missing the playoffs for the first time since 2014. A shocking and humbling end to what had been a legendary run of sustained excellence. 3 Super Bowl titles, 5 Super Bowl appearances, a true modern dynasty, suddenly forced to answer hard questions about where it goes from here. And in the middle of all that uncertainty, while Mahomes was still deep in rehabilitation, working his way back from major knee surgery, the Chiefs made a decision that stunned the entire sports world. They didn't wait to see how his recovery would go. They didn't hedge. They doubled down completely. On June 10th, the Chiefs and Mahomes agreed to a reworked contract extension that added 2 additional years onto his existing deal, keeping him under contract in Kansas City all the way through the 2033 season, when Mahomes will be 38 years old. The new total value of the contract sits at $504,750,000. Let that number actually register for a second. Over $500 million. It is the very first contract in the history of the National Football League to cross that threshold. Not just in football either. In terms of total compensation, it stands as one of the largest contracts in the history of professional sports as a whole. Breaking down the numbers even further, the new money added to the deal is worth $239 million, with the first 4 years of that new money fully guaranteed at signing. Beginning in 2027, Mahomes will average $64 million per season, an increase of $19 million annually from his previous deal. That average annual salary immediately becomes the highest of any player in NFL history, surpassing Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott, who had been sitting at $60 million per year. With incentives and escalators included, the total value of Mahomes' contract could climb as high as $522,250,000. If you zoom out on Mahomes' entire career earnings picture, it becomes even more staggering. Counting every dollar the Chiefs have committed to him going all the way back to 2022, the franchise will have paid Patrick Mahomes a combined total of $689 million in new money alone by the time this contract runs its course in 2033. His career earnings, which currently sit at roughly $232 million, are projected to climb past $730 million total by the time it's all said and done. Chiefs owner Clark Hunt released a statement praising Mahomes, calling him one of the most iconic and beloved figures in sports over the last decade, crediting him with helping put the city of Kansas City on the world stage. General Manager Brett Veach called it a landmark deal for what he described as a once-in-a-lifetime player. But here is what makes the timing of this deal so fascinating and honestly so telling about how much the Chiefs organization believes in their quarterback. This extension was signed while Mahomes was still recovering from a serious, season-ending knee surgery, with no guarantee at the time of signing that he would even be ready for the start of training camp. Reports at the time suggested Mahomes was actually ahead of schedule in his recovery, which gave the front office extra confidence. But make no mistake, this wasn't a reward for a healthy, dominant season. This was a bet, a statement of total conviction, made in the middle of uncertainty. The Chiefs were essentially saying, we don't care what the last season looked like. We don't care that you're still rehabbing a torn knee. We believe in you completely for the next 8 years of your career. It's a fascinating contrast to what we just talked about happening in Cleveland with Myles Garrett. 2 franchises, 2 superstar-level talents, 2 very different philosophies. One team chose to cash in on their superstars' trade value at the absolute peak of his powers. The other team chose to bet even more money on an even longer timeline on a superstar who was hurt and unproven in that specific moment. Both moves make complete sense from a business perspective, but they represent 2 totally opposite ways of thinking about risk in professional sports. Now, while these headline trades and contracts were dominating the national conversation, there were several other storylines quietly simmering across the league that deserve just as much attention, because together they paint a much fuller picture of just how chaotic this particular NFL offseason truly was. Let's talk about the situation in Las Vegas and New York first. The Raiders made a move that flew a little more under the radar compared to the other trades we've discussed, but it still completely reshapes two different quarterback rooms. Geno Smith, who had been the Raiders' starting quarterback, was traded to the New York Jets. In return, the Jets sent back a 6th-round draft pick, and the Raiders received an additional 7th-round selection as part of the deal. It's a much smaller trade in terms of draft compensation compared to the Garrett or McDuffie deals, but it carries real weight in terms of how both rosters are shaped heading into the season, especially with the Jets needing a stabilizing veteran presence at the quarterback position after years of instability at that spot. Now, let's turn to a story that has been quietly simmering in Tampa Bay all offseason long. One that centers around quarterback Baker Mayfield. After leading the Buccaneers through a strong stretch of football, Mayfield's play leveled off somewhat down the stretch of last season. And to make matters more complicated, Tampa Bay lost veteran wide receiver Mike Evans this offseason, removing a key piece of the passing attack that Mayfield had relied on for years, despite still having some solid receiving options left on the roster. There has been ongoing public posturing between Mayfield's camp and the organization regarding a new contract extension. It hasn't turned into anything explosive or ugly, but it has stretched on for months without resolution. Analysts around the league have pointed out that this kind of public back and forth is nothing new for Mayfield specifically. He has built an entire career on being doubted, then proving people wrong, then finding himself in yet another contract dispute, then proving people wrong all over again. Most people around the league believe a deal between Mayfield and the Buccaneers will eventually get done, likely right around the unofficial deadline that comes with the start of training camp, since deadlines have a funny way of pushing negotiations toward resolution. But as of the beginning of July, no long-term agreement had been finalized, and Mayfield is set to enter the season with his financial future still technically unresolved. Meanwhile, out in Dallas, wide receiver George Pickens found himself in a very similar tug-of-war with the Cowboys front office. Pickens had been given the franchise tag for the 2026 season, a designation that guarantees him a massive one-year salary but keeps him from testing true free agency and finding a long-term deal elsewhere. Understandably frustrated by that arrangement, Pickens skipped the voluntary portion of the Cowboys' offseason program entirely, a quiet form of protest that plenty of players have used over the years when they feel undervalued by their own franchise. But when it came time for the team's mandatory minicamp in June, an event players are contractually required to attend, Pickens showed up. And in front of reporters, he made it clear that despite his frustrations over the tag, he was fully committed to playing for Dallas in 2026. He told the media that what mattered most to him was winning, and that he wanted to help bring a championship to a locker room full of players who had never experienced that feeling before. It was a mature, team-first response to a situation that could have easily turned into a much messier public standoff, the kind we've seen play out with other star players around the league in years past. Speaking of messier standoffs, let's head up to San Francisco, where wide receiver Brandon Ayuk has found himself increasingly at odds with the 49ers organization. Over the course of the offseason, tension between Ayuk and the front office has continued to simmer, and at one point, Ayuk publicly criticized the organization, a rare and telling moment for a player who has generally kept disagreements behind closed doors in the past. As of the beginning of July, that standoff remains unresolved, and it's a situation worth watching closely as training camp approaches, because these kinds of public fractures between star players and front offices have a tendency to either quietly resolve themselves once the games actually start matching, or they explode into full-blown trade demands once the regular season gets underway. And then there's a story out of Los Angeles that has absolutely nothing to do with contracts or trades, but carries serious weight for the Rams heading into their now Super Bowl favorite campaign. Starting left tackle Alaric Jackson was arrested this offseason on a felony domestic violence charge. This is obviously a deeply serious situation, and it immediately created uncertainty for the Rams' offensive line heading into the 2026 season. Protecting a 38-year-old franchise quarterback like Matthew Stafford requires an elite, dependable offensive line, and losing your starting left tackle to a legal situation like this, even temporarily, forces a franchise to scramble for answers at one of the most important positions on the entire roster. It's a stark reminder that even for a team riding as much positive momentum as the Rams currently are, adding superstar talent through trades doesn't automatically eliminate risk. Real-life complications can derail even the most carefully constructed championship roster in an instant. So let's take a step back now and look at the bigger picture, because when you line up every single one of these stories side by side, a much clearer narrative starts to emerge about where the balance of power in the NFL currently sits heading into training camp. The Los Angeles Rams spent this entire offseason positioning themselves as the team to beat. It started back in March with the bold trade for Trent McDuffie and his record-breaking cornerback extension. It continued into free agency with the additions of players like Jalen Watson. And it exploded into the national spotlight in June with the stunning acquisition of Myles Garrett, giving them a roster that features a reigning offensive most valuable player and a reigning defensive play of the year on the very same team. Something that quite literally has never happened before since the merger back in 1970. Betting markets responded immediately, installing the Rams as clear Super Bowl favorites, ahead of the defending champion Seahawks, ahead of the Bills, ahead of the Ravens. On paper, at least, Los Angeles has built a roster capable of legitimately dominating both sides of the football. But football isn't played on paper. The Alaric Jackson situation is a perfect example of how quickly the story can shift. Health, legal situations, chemistry, coaching, all of these variables still have to play out over an entire season before we know whether this collection of talent actually translates into a championship. Meanwhile, up in New England, the Patriots quietly transformed their passing attack by landing A.J. Brown, giving quarterback Drake May, who is entering just his third professional season, a legitimate elite receiving threat to build around after a Super Bowl appearance the year before. If May continues the kind of efficient, high-level play he showed in his sophomore season, and Brown returns to his peak form in Foxborough, the Patriots suddenly look like one of the most complete teams in the entire American Football Conference. Down in Kansas City, the Chiefs enter this season in an unusual position for them. For the first time in years, they are not the clear-cut favorites. They are coming off a losing season and a playoff miss. They traded away a star cornerback, and their franchise quarterback is still working his way back from a serious knee injury. But they also just made an enormous statement of long-term confidence in that same quarterback, locking him up for essentially the rest of his prime. And they added significant future draft capital through trades like the McDuffie deal to help retool the roster around him. It's a franchise in a genuine transition period, betting everything that their window with Mahomes is far from closed, even if the last chapter didn't end the way they wanted. And then you have storylines like Baker Mayfield's contract limbo in Tampa Bay, George Pickens choosing loyalty over frustration in Dallas, and Brandon Ayuk's unresolved tension in San Francisco. All reminders that beneath the biggest headline trades, there are dozens of smaller, quieter dramas playing out across all 32 franchises, each one capable of shifting the balance of a season in ways we can't fully predict yet. What makes all of this so fascinating is the timing. Nearly every single one of these seismic moves happened within just a few months of each other, clustered right around the transition from free agency into the draft, and then again right around the post-June first trade window teams use to manage their salary caps. It's not a coincidence. It's simply how the modern NFL business calendar works. Teams wait for specific financial windows to open before making their boldest moves, which is exactly why an offseason that looks quiet on the surface in April can suddenly explode with 3 or 4 league-altering trades within the same handful of weeks in late May and early June. So here's where things stand as we head toward training camp. The Rams have built what many analysts consider to be the most talented and most complete roster in the entire NFL, headlined by a reigning MVP quarterback and now the most dominant defensive player of this generation. The Patriots have quietly retooled their passing offense around a young, ascending quarterback fresh off a Super Bowl trip. The Chiefs are in a genuine transition year, leaning on generational continuity and a massive vote of confidence in Mahomes to bridge them back to championship contention. And scattered across the rest of the league, storylines involving Mayfield, Pickens, Ayuk, and countless others remain completely unresolved, waiting to play out once the pads finally go on and the games start to count. Training camp is about to begin, and if this offseason has taught us anything, it's that the moment everyone assumes the NFL calendar has gone quiet is exactly the moment you need to be paying the closest attention, because that is precisely when the biggest, most franchise-altering news tends to break. The blockbuster trades are done. The record-breaking contracts are signed. But the stories we just walked through are far from finished. They are only just beginning to be written on the field, and that chapter starts in a matter of weeks.